You're standing at a roulette table in Las Vegas, summer of 1961. The wheel spins one way, the little white ball runs the other. The croupier is about to call no more bets. A quiet man at the end of the layout slides a stack of 10-cent chips onto a cluster of numbers. He isn't watching the ball, he's listening. Hidden in his ear is a speaker the size of a pea. A wire, thinner than a human hair, runs down his collar. Against his body sits a homemade computer the size of a cigarette pack. 12 transistors, built in a basement, switched on by a toe inside his shoe. 2 scientists from MIT built that machine to predict where the ball would land. In 1961, using it was completely legal. This is the story of the Edward Thorp and Claude Shannon wearable computer. It worked in the lab. It gave them a 44% edge on a game built to be unbeatable. The only question left was whether it could survive 60 seconds on a real casino floor. Six years before that table, the idea didn't exist. It started with a heresy. In the spring of 1955, Edward Thorp was a graduate physics student at UCLA, thinking about roulette. Everyone knew the game was unbeatable. A mathematical theorem said so. No betting system could overcome the house. On an American wheel, the house keeps 5.26 cents of every dollar forever. That number is the wall. But Thorp wasn't looking at the betting. He was looking at the ball. To him, the ball running its track wasn't random at all. It was a planet. In his own words, it moved like a planet in its stately, precise, and predictable path. A planet's position can be calculated, so why not a ball? No one had asked the obvious question. The roulette ball obeys physics. Its speed decays. Friction slows it. Gravity pulls it off the rim at a predictable point. Measure how fast it's going, and you can estimate where it will fall. Not the exact number, but the neighborhood. The hard part was measuring it in real time, at a table, without getting caught. Thorp shelved the idea for years. He moved to MIT in 1959. He cracked blackjack first, building the card-counting system that became the bestseller Beat the Dealer. To publish it, he needed a member of the National Academy of Sciences to forward his paper. Exactly one mathematician at MIT qualified. His name was Claude Shannon. Shannon was already a legend, though most of the world didn't know it yet. In 1937, as a master's student, he had proved that electric circuits could do logic, the single idea that makes every computer you own possible. People called him the father of information theory. Thorp called him the ultimate gadgeteer. On a chilly November afternoon in 1960, Thorp walked into Shannon's office, expecting 5 minutes. He got hours. He told Shannon about blackjack. Then Shannon asked whether he was working on anything else. Thorp told him about the ball that moved like a planet. Something lit up. Shannon lived in a huge 3-story wooden house on a lake a few miles from Cambridge, a house once owned by the reformer Jane Addams. His basement was a wonderland. $100,000 of motors, switches, gears, and transistors. The two men ordered a regulation roulette wheel from Reno for $1,500 and set it on an old slate billiard table, the heaviest, steadiest surface in the house. Then they went to work taking the ball's motion apart. Shannon, it turned out, was as much a circus as a scientist. He juggled. He rode a unicycle across a steel cable strung between 2 tree stumps. His goal, which he eventually reached, was to juggle while riding the unicycle on the wire. He had built a mechanical finger in his kitchen that curled when you pulled a cable down on the lab. This was the mind now aimed at a roulette wheel. They timed the ball with a strobe light and clock divided into hundreds of a second. The strobe froze the ball in midair, again and again, so they could see exactly how wrong their timing was and fix it. With practice, their error shrank from 0.03 of a second to 1. A single revolution of the ball, measured that precisely, was enough to tell them roughly how many laps it had left. The wheel was not random. It was a clock nobody had learned to read. But reading it at a real table meant building something no one had ever built. From November 1960 to June 1961, the two men built their machine in the basement. The final version was an analog computer with 12 transistors, the size of a pack of cigarettes. No screen, no keyboard, the whole thing was controlled by the feet. Micro switches went inside their shoes, worked by the big toe. One switch armed the computer, the other measured time. Tap it as the ball passed a fixed mark. Tap it again 1 revolution later. From that single interval, the machine worked out the rest. The answer came back as music. The computer played a scale of 8 notes through a tiny speaker, each note standing for 1 slice of the wheel, 1 octant. An octant is just that, an eighth of the rim, a handful of numbers sitting next to each other. As the wheel turned, the notes climbed. When the toe clocked the ball for the last time, the music stopped. The final note you heard named the slice to bet. Why a slice and not a single number? Because the ball never lands clean. It hits the metal dividers between the pockets and spatters, bouncing forward or back a few pockets either way, beyond anyone's control. The physics could hand them a neighborhood. It could never promise a door, so they bet the neighborhood and let the edge do the rest. The whole calculation took no time at all. The prediction landed the instant the last switch closed. Think about what that means for a second. A man could stand at a table, tap his toe twice inside his shoe, and hear a song tell him where to put his money. In a basement in 1961, 2 professors had built the first wearable computer, decades before anyone used the words. Now the numbers. The house edge on that wheel was 5.26% against the player. Thorp and Shannon's device gave the player an edge of about 44%. They hadn't shaved the wall down. They had flipped it. But brilliance and fragility lived in the same box. The speaker sat inside the ear canal. The wire feeding it had to be invisible. So they used steel wire the diameter of a hair, painted to match skin and hair, glued down with spirit gum, the stuff actors use for fake beards. It was beautiful work. It was also the weakest link in the entire system. The first time Thorp wired himself up for a rehearsal, Shannon looked him over, eyes crinkling, and asked, "What makes you tick?" That hair-thin wire was the one component they could never make reliable. In the end, it would decide everything. Because the machine was finished, and the finished machine wants a real wheel. August 1961, Las Vegas. 2 couples arrive in the desert heat and the neon. Edward and Vivian Thorp, Claude and Betty Shannon. To anyone watching, 2 pairs of tourists. In their luggage, a computer. Here's how the play works. Shannon stands near the wheel. He looks like another hopeful with a system, scribbling down numbers as they come up. Nobody blinks. Half the floor is doing the same thing. But Shannon isn't recording for luck. His big toe is on a switch inside his shoe, timing the rotor and the ball. The machine does its work and sends the tones. And the window is brutally short. In most casinos, the call of "no more bets" comes just a revolution or 2 before the ball drops. So the timing, the math, and the bet all have to happen in those last few seconds, while the ball is still flying. Time it wrong, too early or too late, and the machine plays nothing at all. At the far end of the long table, Thorp places the bets. He barely glances at the ball. He doesn't need to. He's listening to the music in his ear, waiting for the last note. When it lands, he pushes 10-cent chips onto the octant the machine just named. The 2 wives drift nearby, watching the room, watching for the one face that's watching them back. And it works. Dime by dime, the chips pile up. An octant hits, then another. In Thorp's own words, when the computer was working, It worked very well. They are sitting at the most famous, unbeatable game on Earth, and they are beating it with a song. Now, look at the same table from the other side. A pit boss watches a casino floor for a living. He knows every cheat in the book. The card counters flicking eyes, the past posters quick hands, the marked deck, the rigged wheel. His whole job is the wall, the 5.26% that's supposed to grind every player down to nothing, given enough spins. So what does he do with a quiet man who never watches the ball, who counts no cards, touches no one, carries nothing anyone can see? A man whose bets keep landing on one arc of the wheel, again and again, in a way simple luck cannot explain. There's nothing to catch, and that is exactly what makes it frightening. This is a kind of cheating the floor was never built to see, because it lives in physics, in a toe, in a wire under the hair. The casinos of 1961 were not gentle places. This was a mafia-run industry. The world later dramatized in the movie Casino. And a player caught with a machine could expect far worse than a tap on the shoulder. Betty Shannon was nervous. Vivian Thorpe was nervous. The danger was real. But step back from the table now, because here is what almost no one realizes. The thing in Thorpe's shoe was never really a gambling tool. It was a prototype. The first wearable computer. A machine that measured the world, ran a calculation in real time, and whispered the answer to the person wearing it. Decades before the smartwatch. Decades before the fitness tracker. Two men in a basement had invented the whole idea, and the test track happened to be a roulette wheel. And the same mind that timed that ball was about to aim the exact same math at a far bigger casino. Roulette was the warm-up. The real game was Wall Street. Within a few years, Thorpe would carry the same tools to the stock market, measure a system, find the small, reliable edge, size the bet so you never go broke. He ran one of the first quantitative hedge funds, Princeton Newport Partners. He priced stock options before the famous Black-Scholes formula was ever published. He became known as the godfather of the quaints, the math-driven traders who now move trillions through the markets. The roulette ball taught him the lesson that made his fortune. A system that looks random usually isn't. It's just a clock nobody else has learned to read. But back in Vegas, in 1961, the clock was still ticking, and the weakest part of the machine was about to fail at the worst possible moment. It wasn't the pit boss who beat them. It was the wire. The hair-thin steel thread that carried the music to the ear kept snapping. A turn of the head, a bead of sweat, a careless movement, and the sound died. Then came the slow, tedious repair, slipping away, re-gluing the wire to the skin, threading it back under the hair, hoping no one noticed the same two couples vanishing and returning. Once it went wrong in plain sight, a woman beside Thorpe glanced over and froze in horror. He didn't know why. He left the table fast, found a mirror, and saw it. The little speaker had crept out of his ear canal and was poking from the side of his head. In his own words, like an alien insect. Every break was a small heart attack. Every repair was time on the floor they couldn't afford. The edge was real, 44%, confirmed at the table, exactly what the lab had promised. But you cannot bet a fortune through a wire that dies every few spins. So they made a decision that sounds insane. They stopped, not because the idea failed. The idea was perfect. They stopped on 10-cent chips before the real money ever started, because the hardware wasn't ready and the room was too dangerous to keep fixing it in. Thorpe left MIT that same summer for a professorship in New Mexico. Shannon stayed in Massachusetts. Half a country now sat between them, and the basement and the project quietly died. Two of the smartest people alive had a 44% edge on Las Vegas, and they let it go over a broken wire and a long drive. For 5 years, they told no one. Then in 1966, certain they would never use it, Thorp described the system in public. The secret was out. Other groups picked up the idea and built their own roulette computers with newer parts. They hit the same 44% edge. And again, ran into the same wall of unreliable hardware. But the casinos had heard enough. For more than 20 years, using a computer to beat a Nevada wheel had been perfectly legal. Then on May 30th,
Sir,
1985,
that
the
device
state
is now
passed an
illegal.
emergency law.
Hand
it
it
banned
over.
any device that predicts an outcome,
This is
calculates
over.
the odds, or tracks the play. The thing two professors built in a basement had become dangerous enough to outlaw by name. That law is the system's answer. The casino couldn't beat the math, so it changed the rules. Proof, written into the books of the state of Nevada, that the trick was real. Which leaves the question this whole story has been circling. Thorp and Shannon could have spent their lives quietly bleeding casinos with the first wearable computer. Instead, they tested it, proved it, packed it away, and handed the idea to the world. Thorp went to Wall Street and made his fortune in the open. Shannon went back to his juggling and his gadgets and his lake. So which were they? The smartest gamblers who ever lived? Or two scientists who only ever wanted to prove a point and got bored the moment they had? Tell me below. If you want more stories of clever people quietly breaking impossible systems, subscribe and stick around. The next one is already waiting.